Could there be a biological component to chronic failure besides gender and ethnicity? If a valuable person keeps failing while doing everything, quote, right, end quote, should they continue to take the blame?
This humorous and provocative book examines how to understand and navigate a society secretly structured around social status and ranking. Ingram draws on years of interdisciplinary research, along with his own experiences, travels, and observations, to arrive at startling conclusions about our supposedly civilized and progressive communities.
Are we actually living in an attention-obsessed caste system?
If so, is it based solely on race, gender, or economic class? If not, what other traits, from birth or otherwise, separate so-called born leaders from those branded for life as followers? In addition, what is attention caste? Chances are you know at least one underdog whose contributions to society have been overlooked as they endure a lifetime of professional obscurity. Or perhaps you are one of those suffering in silence and invisibility. Are you ready to be free from your shame and confusion? Are you ready to learn how an underdog can become an alpha? J.T. Ingram is a creative entrepreneur whose 2 decades of professional and personal struggles had far less to do with his chronic health conditions and far more to do with his place in society that behaves like pack animals. His experiences led him to a startling discovery. In a world built on biological status cues, some people are unconsciously assigned the role of runt from birth, regardless of their abilities. That realization inspired him to uncover the hidden science of the underdog, quote unquote, and amongst other things, to bark more, wag less.
Besides the numerous women and men cited in this material, I must thank Dr. Daniel Everett, Dr. Pat Patterson, along with others who, like me, made an accidental discovery that challenged the establishment. Most importantly, Dr. Robert Sapolsky, who put those ugly, stressed-out baboons on my television screen those years ago and prompted me to embark on this agonizing body of research. I acknowledge, besides all the underdogs like me with, quote, perceived privilege, end quote, that I must show my respect and gratitude to all of those who are not only the runts of society, but who, in addition to originating from, quote, underdog communities, end quote, had to strive even harder than I have, considering your gender, race, and economic class. Someone I failed to mention in this entire book course here, in this audio book here especially, needs to be acknowledged as someone you've never probably heard of before. Melinda K. Ledbetter. We sadly lost her a few years before I was working on this project. And during the creation of the project, we lost her husband, of course, Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, who, although considered a celebrity throughout much of his life, was an iconic and underrated underdog who unfortunately lost his ability to bark. Thanks to an alpha type like Ledbetter, she, quote, barked, end quote, their way to his liberation. I hope to acknowledge those alpha types who get inspired to speak up for the weak instead of biting them.
Dedication for Anne Jurian, the quiet voice behind the men of science and the unseen soul of humanity's first messages cast into the unknown.
Also dedicated to all those who, I won't go into detail, but they helped me to recognize that they were part of the problem and that their failures to advocate for my career and take advantage of my weakness, their refusal to recognize what the problem was, contributed to me looking deeper for answers. I must also thank you, the folks listening right now, and a small handful of women in my virtual classes here who actually liked these ideas, and everyone else ignored me. Cassandra's curse, which I'll get into later here. Cassandra's curse is finally broken. The silent are heard and the invisible are seen. Now, together, let's allow fairness, equality, reason, and compassion to rule the world, not just biting and growling while the overrated alpha dog types who have too much power. Rejoice and be empowered as you listen.
Foreword by Joseph Toon. My life had unraveled. 30 jobs, failed relationships, a failed marriage, losing my mom to addiction, periods of homelessness, in and out of jail, and 9 rehabs. I spent years chasing anything that would numb me until one day I surrendered and prayed. I'll do whatever it takes. Show me the way. That surrender opened the door to inner work. Meetings, therapy, honest confession, and small daily practices that help me rebuild. Over time, I experienced spiritual shifts, rebuilt trust, and reclaimed some sense of purpose. Today I'm sober, awake, committed to service and writing, and grateful for each new day. While I was writing my recovery story in a coffee shop one afternoon, a woman told me about a particular wellness-related community and venue, but it was an hour away. A few weeks later, feeling down and needing a change of energy, I decided to go. I only had about $80 to my name, but I trusted the pull and took an Uber to the event. I arrived and felt out of place until a man named Jason T. Ingram came up and introduced himself. Jason, like Jason Friday the 13th, so you won't forget. Ironically, it happened to be the weekend of Friday the 13th, and for such a spiritual environment, I thought his irreverent humor was refreshing. We started talking about life and healing, and he offered to do some intuitive energy work on me. He noted how society had demoted me and other concepts that I don't hear from other leaders. We connected instantly. He shared about his life as a composer and artist and about the book he was writing about rethinking chronic failure. Bark more, wag less. We exchanged numbers and became friends. No one else really believed in me when it came to writing my book, but he did. And that faith helped me keep going despite the challenges. Jason has experience in public relations and taught me a lot. I believed in him too and wanted to help him bring his ideas to life. He told me he had been praying for someone to collaborate with, just as I had. It felt incredible how life aligns us with the right people, the ones who help us fulfill our purpose. When I read Bark More, Wag Less, my first reaction was, finally, a book for me, finally something different. What stood out immediately was that it didn't place all the blame for chronic failure on the individuals who live it. Most motivational material spends its time telling you that your failures are entirely your fault. This book doesn't do that. Jason's central idea is that leadership and success have a biological component that goes beyond race, gender, age, or any quote-unquote perceived privileges, which challenges a lot of popular belief. He builds on a sociological hypothesis that born leaders may have certain biological advantages over others. Instead of assuming everyone starts from the same place, he asks whether biology itself could tilt leadership in favor of certain people, much like an alpha dog establishing itself in a litter of puppies. The book is an expose about ranking, status, and social scoring, and how those systems may be worse than we imagine, and getting worse in society. Many of us have followed motivational programs, coaching, and business training for years, and still felt like failures. Jason presents the revolutionary idea that for many of us, failure may not be only about our individual efforts, but also about living inside a civilization that rewards certain traits and demotes others. If your community has branded you a follower instead of a leader, you're already fighting uphill with leaders as well as their followers, enabling a strict system full of unwritten and unspoken rules. I'm a millennial, and Jason is Gen X, but he speaks my language. He's also a bit of a punk, and I imagine high school and college students would connect with him easily. I'm also a middle-aged white American male, and there's an irony in being considered a chronic failure, despite the privileges I'm supposed to have. It puzzled me that these privileges didn't always make success easier. Unprivileged leaders often have to work harder to rise, but I couldn't understand why those formulas didn't always apply across the board. Jason's perspective helped me understand what else might be going on. Jason doesn't claim to have all the answers, but his life experience, combined with years of study, gave me explanations about society I had never seen anywhere else. When I read this book, I realized it wasn't all about him. He cites so many sources from so many angles that his huge body of work can impress academic people as much as it might offend them. His cynical humor might seem like poor taste to some, but his angle reaches everyone. Women, men, young, old, white, not white, rich, and poor. His political views are moderate enough that someone left-leaning could relate just as easily as someone right-leaning. For a guy who's only finished reading one book in well over a decade, it was fascinating to see how he absorbed information from so many different kinds of sources, including watching videos of university professors. He learned to cope with severe learning disabilities in ways that make it hard to believe he was considered nearly illiterate as a young adult. Living with cognitive issues myself, I found it empowering as an inspiring writer to see how many tools we can use to thrive alongside high-functioning leaders and published authors. I've never met anyone who writes more books than he reads. I'm looking forward to the ones he hasn't published yet. My first major insight from the manuscript was Jason's smell discourses. He suggests we might unconsciously identify leaders and followers through smell and other subtle cues. It sounded strange until I saw that he cited scientific experiments supporting the idea. I had spent years trying to imitate successful people without realizing they had certain privileges, some purely biological, that were unrealistic for me to think I could attain on my own. Jason writes from a lifetime of suffering and professional obscurity, alienation, and social banishment, combined with several years of study and countless cited sources. The book may not have all the answers, but it identifies the problem so exhaustively and explicitly that it should be considered by everyone in the business development world, and by the underdogs and runts that society has overlooked. Both those who succeed and those who fail should read it. Jason has been teaching various subjects for more than 30 years, and his repetitive, redundant writing style drills ideas until they stick. If you miss something, you'll see it again and again until you are either angry or change your mind. He suffered professional invisibility and trauma where most people would have given up. Instead of listening to successful alphas, he immersed himself in a decade of interdisciplinary studies, neuroscience, paleoanthropology, zoology, history, theology, quantum physics, and metaphysics. He jokes about himself like he's a cult leader, coining phrases like the Bara effect, perceived privilege, and underdog communities. His style drills his point severely, but if society brainwashes us into supporting social ranking, it might be fair to say we could use a little brainwashing to deprogram the old ideas left over from ancient civilization and primal animal instincts. The book is easy to read, fun, challenging, and definitely not G-rated. It's funny, crude, different, eccentric, validating, resourceful, geeky, quirky, iconoclastic, revealing, dangerous, and irreverent. It fits categories like humor, self-help, faith and spirituality, science, social commentary, motivational writing, business, and mental health, but also doesn't belong neatly in any single one of them. If this book had been written by someone else, and I had picked it up without knowing Jason, I would have felt relieved and validated that after years of business training and motivational rhetoric, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was doing everything right and still being blamed for 100% of my failures. This book changed how I see failure, leadership, privilege, and society. It helped me understand that maybe the world is structured in ways we don't fully see, and that sometimes changing your life means first understanding the system you've been trying to survive in, finding coping mechanisms, and eventually changing our world. Joseph Toon, author, Recovery and Truth.
I began writing this out of great turmoil. It was as if everything around me was trying to hinder this project. I had to make it a priority at times, or else there would have never been finished. Sometimes it needed to be more important than taking responsibility for things like a leaking roof and chores piling up. Having given up on motivational material and spiritual stuff, finding answers to my own chronic failure, I turned to immersing myself in interdisciplinary studies, mostly related to science. So I wrote a book 3 years earlier, a different book, and wanted to start fresh with this, something that focused more on this particular issue. Since religion and business development rhetoric didn't help, I realized that they not only didn't have the answer to the problem, they never really addressed what the primary problem was. Therefore, I decided to write this material about the problem. Although negative and hopeless as it seemed, at least we would know where to start, because how can we find the answer if we don't know the question? So here's the funny part. I didn't really intend for this book project to provide any solutions, but that changed. In addition, I didn't even have a book title or anything until I started writing the ending sections. During the creative process, I found that there was quite a lot of ideas on how to resolve these deep societal sicknesses. I also began writing for the first several months in secret. I didn't want anyone's negative reaction to influence me to give up. But although illness and interpersonal conflicts delayed the project further, I did manage to complete the project, which took well over a year from start to finish. Also during this time, I finally started meeting other writers and actually took an interest in what I was doing. I also found new ways to break through roadblocks to editing and publishing, including new technologies and previously unknown resources. With that being said, this particular audio course did not have the privilege of being in the care of a professional editor, like peer-reviewed on a major setting, even a copy editor, a seasoned proofreader. Although I've been told it's basically perfect as it is. It gets my point across, howbeit raw and brash. And this is the version for the philosophical early adapters and the desperate seekers. Writing and putting into practice these principles laid out in this body of work had been a transformative experience for me. I never imagined my life would be affected by this project like this. Aside all the oppositional energies constantly thrown at me, these 16 plus months of laboring also have resulted in uncanny results in my business as well as my personal life and empowerment. I hope that my listeners experience the positive transformation they need as a result of listening and practicing. I pray that those with too much power learn ways to fearlessly share their resources and find that peace and fulfillment they need to be a creator in a society as opposed to being a dominator. Most importantly, I pray that those with little to no power in this world will experience their breakthrough, especially those valuable creators who have suffered a lifetime in professional obscurity. Prologue. Why valuable people can be chronic failures. Did you ever wonder if there was some geeky, unlikable guy that somehow saved humanity from destruction? Perhaps there was. We'll never really know unless alternate timelines exist and there was some way to observe them. In addition, do you ever wonder if digging for copper can cause you to discover gold? Maybe you just decided to go on a road trip one day and find a town you wanted to move to as a result. Have there been endeavors that accidentally led to a world-changing event? Well, that was the case in the middle of the 20th century when a scientist was asked to do a simple project, which led to a very alarming outcome. Born in 1922, Dr. Claire Patterson was a geochemist working at a university when he was given a simple project: determine the age of the Earth. Given the skills of this brilliant graduate student and the tools available, this would have been a fairly quick project. However, there was a major roadblock that delayed his work for over 5 years of failed tests. Lead particles in the air and in their bodies kept skewing the results, which led Dr. Patterson to design this special clean room, or maybe one of the first clean rooms ever made, in addition to other methods. He finally determined that the age of the Earth is approximately 4.55 billion years old, and ironically, that seems to be what he is recognized for. In my opinion, this geeky, unlikable fellow is responsible for the well-being and survival of billions of individuals across the planet because his accidental discovery: airborne lead poisoning. Dr. Pat could not help but wonder where all this lead was coming from and if there was a significant health risk, or health risks rather, associated with all the toxic levels of lead in the air, water, and in our bodies. It turns out that lead, as well as mercury, for instance, causes all kinds of serious health conditions. And history, as well as science, has proven this. Unfortunately, Pat hit another roadblock: big oil. The largest polluter came from leaded gasoline, and he had to contend with major petroleum companies in a fight that lasted decades. As a result of his discovery and his advocacy, several nations around the world, in addition to large corporations, along with other environmental advocates who joined that cause, enabled eventual change. This spread to the elimination of lead in other products like ceramic glaze and house paint. what is the point of discussing geochemistry in a course that is supposed to be about sociology? It's the fact that I similarly started on a journey several years ago to accomplish one task and encountered unexpected roadblocks. Typically, when something gets in the way of a particular project, it is common to find a problem, apply a solution, and proceed. However, that was not the case with me. I discovered a problem that was as widespread as lead in the air throughout much of the 20th century. In addition, this problem did not just influence my life, but countless others who were suffering in obscurity. My goal was to simply go back into business and focus on marketing my own work while backing off of being in supportive roles in other people's projects. I had done this before, and I made a living in creative careers, mostly related to music and teaching. What I did not realize, the changes in my life and the resulting role that society had branded me at the time were keeping me from being seen. I had skills, training, experience, funding, and tools, and I was doing everything, quote, right, end quote, and nothing was working like it used to. I invested in business training, sought coaching, and other reasonable endeavors with no avail. My first year resulted in a 9-month-long depression that actually risked my life. I suffered abuse, neglect, and as a result of the lifestyle changes and the risks associated with these efforts, I suffered a lot of trauma and harm in addition. But I decided not to give up. And I knew that if someone in my situation was ever to be successful, I would have to think outside the box. This led me on a journey into metaphysics and a lot of spiritual junk that led me nowhere but confused and frustrated. Success gurus and other resources did not help relate to my situation. One example is that I was supposed to rely on help from friends, family, and colleagues. What if everyone believes that my vocation should be turned into a useless hobby in order to keep me, quote, busy and invisible, end quote? As a result of focusing on my own projects, in addition to asking for help, I eventually lost everyone in my life. This further led me to blame myself and thus put my mental health and ultimately my life at risk even more. The alternative was far more worse for my well-being: giving up. Every year I found myself trapped in the same cage and unable to get out no matter what I did. I saw other people getting successful and with no effort, and kept questioning why power came so easily to some people while others, even individuals, who had an undeniable capacity to contribute to society in addition to having a better career, failed. The problem was not being a bad person. The problem was also not about having bad products, bad timing, bad marketing, bad funding, or being significantly ugly. There was something fundamentally wrong with my environment. This led me to pursue international commerce, and with the same outcome. In addition, I crossed political barriers, racial barriers, economic barriers, and literally lived in just about every region of the United States during this journey and found the same bizarre results. It was as if the only setting for my work was to build sandcastles too close to the shore, only to have the tide wash them away at regular intervals. Every time I made an impact and started to impress the public, within weeks the tides of civilization would come and sweep me back into professional obscurity without anyone taking notice of what was really going on. Another way to describe this situation is to perform a little thought experiment. An old school Islamic regime. Let's say you're a bright and powerful young woman who just finished high school at the top of your class with extensive honors. In addition, you have a nearly fail-proof business plan with everything needed to launch a successful career except one thing. Everyone believes you shouldn't. Although this might sound like an episode of classic science fiction television program, sadly, this is a reality for a lot of gifted women who are living under forms of Sharia law. In some of these closed nations, women were not allowed to be successful, and in addition, were not even allowed to leave their country to seek asylum from such an oppressive regime. This is where you'll have to find ways to cope with an unfair society. And if that fails, change it. Now, this is still an issue with some of these nations in various degrees, although there have been some cultural and governmental changes over the years. So this story was really more of a thought experiment of something that could have happened generations ago. This course is one of my attempts to identify this global secret that very few of us talk about. If anything like this is mentioned, it is often set in a fantastic, fictional context or laughed at. At times we might be exposed to stories and some of those rare and misleading stories based on real-life figures. In books, movies, and television, that they give false impressions that anyone can be successful. There are just countless examples of what it seems like underdog type who treated unfairly because of their age, race, gender, caste, economic status, disability, religion, political affiliation, sexual preference, gender identity, or even their weight. The story might end with the protagonist rising above the community regardless of how much they might hate, these people or those kinds of people, and we might applaud our beloved, whatever type of disadvantage she or he might have, a handicapped person or a houseless person, or whatever that challenge in society might be. I personally love these stories, and there's nothing essentially wrong with portraying fictional or real-life success stories of those who rose out of obscurity besides their setbacks. I have come to add other aspects to these stories. Were these based on alpha types who possess the ability to lead despite their limitations? Were these individuals simply underdog types from underdog backgrounds who were lucky enough, or dare I say privileged enough, to actually get the help they need to succeed? I made an effort during this journey to study the lives of individuals who are successful and creative in academic careers to see if there was a common denominator. Every one of these individuals relied on others. How many success stories of public figures single-handedly rose out of obscurity? Even lawn chair Larry Walters had some help from his girlfriend for his infamous cluster ballooning flight. Other examples of ignored guys rose to attention, did stunts that were far more risky, even deadly. If it wasn't for Henry Darger's landlord discovering over 15,000 pages of tightly spaced manuscripts and hundreds of accompanying illustrations, the public would have never learned of his secret. Perhaps he started out this 60-plus year project. He thought that perhaps he would publish his volumes. Maybe earlier on he was hoping to get discovered. But from what I experienced, in addition to a lot of other creatives, we might start out assuming that we will be considered, only to soon give up a decade and, decide to remain in obscurity. That might be some, like Darger, who was regarded as someone who actually wanted to keep his work a secret, although we might never know if that was his original intention. Frank Zappa would tell the public various things, like expecting everyone to be jerks. Or, well, I won't say what he said literally, in order to not let people be down. So, expect people to be jerks in order not to be let down. In addition, he admonished emerging artists saying things like, "Nobody wants to hear your music." At a young age, he was privileged enough to have his compositions featured in movies and even was on television, only to be forgotten about and try to survive playing rock music in nightclubs. In a similar fashion, Dr. Pat discovering lead poisoning, a Chicago landlord discovering the innovative works of Henry Darger, producer and music business entrepreneur Tom Wilson accidentally discovered Frank Zappa, really having no idea what kind of Pandora's box he would release into society. Oops, an underdog accidentally was able to significantly contribute to the world. Sadly, there is little to nothing said about the creative efforts that could not only contribute to society. There could be products and ideas that could have helped us move forward and even solve some of the world's greatest problems. We will never know. Archaeologists spend countless hours and funds to dig for lost treasures, while there is little to nothing being done to discover what might be going on right in your neighborhood. Accidentally discovering these valuable principles has been a passion for me, just like finding a gold mine in your backyard. However, with gold, all I need is enough time, a good shovel, along with some simple tools, and separate gold nuggets and flakes from the dirt. In addition, I would simply go into an establishment that examines gold and, buys it from me. But what if every gold buyer in the world somehow decides that I am someone who is not worth considering? In addition, what if nobody else believes me and assumes that I'm just digging up pyrite, fool's gold? Another thought experiment consists of imagining that you are a protagonist in an unused script for the Twilight Zone or the Outer Limits, something like that. In this story, somehow you have to move to a small town consisting of 1,000 friendly people. As the story progresses, it turns out that nobody believes in the existence of something that is apparent everywhere. In this case, everyone in the town has an actual living elephant in every room of every house and every building, including public places. In addition to the elephants leaving their droppings everywhere, they step on things, injuring people, breaking valuables. The story ends with you literally talking to each one of the 1,000 local residents, trying to determine if anyone sees or acknowledges any one of these elephants that are everywhere. Finally, everyone determines that you are delusional, that you have to make the choice whether you're going to keep talking about elephants or not. Now, let's say that you actually find yourself living among 1,000 people or 2,000 who have a similar sort of crowdsourced denial. If that's the case, then it's time to do the math. Statistics determine that if you are in an environment where one person is sane and 1,000 people are not, that's about a 1 in 1,000 chance that you happen to not be crazy. If The issues are addressed in this course are things that are overlooked to the point of being the proverbial elephant in the room. There's a good chance that you happen to be someone who needs to see those elephants, talk about those elephants, and ultimately do something about those elephants. But if you were like me and a lot of other overlooked people in this maze we call civilization, you are one in 1,000. And this book, this course, and this ideas and material is for you. Otherwise, if you are one of the 1,000, this book can be an opportunity for you to find some sanity and explanations for those apparent failures you may happen to care about. This book, this course, does not necessarily study the habits of successful people, because it really doesn't matter if an underdog type imitates an alpha dog type. They will probably get different results. That concept was one of the many unexplainable things that inspired me to pursue answers, because I was indeed following the behaviors of successful leaders and getting nowhere. One of my motivational coaches had a client who reminded me of an older version of myself. It was a surreal experience to meet him and talk briefly between appointments. He had a great presentation of his artworks, his products, and no alpha traits. I could just imagine his coaching sessions were as much as a waste of time as mine were. It was as if I had to keep reminding this business mentor about all the things that did not apply to my situation. I was constantly being directed to do things that were obviously futile to do single-handedly. It was as if I had spent an hour a week with someone who kept telling me to drive myself to the courthouse and get married to myself, carry myself down the stairs, and other tasks that, well, from my perspective, would be impossible. These prevailing attitudes and ideologies are so integrated into our society that I began to question where these ideas originated from. Quite simply, if alphas, their rhetoric, memes, saying, and other anecdotes are what we see and hear, chances are that if we happen to see it and hear about something, it probably originated or was reinterpreted from an alpha-type person and thus tainted with their vantage point. In addition to their ideologies, we must also consider that our leaders might also have ulterior motives, whether they are conscious of them or not. For instance, when a leader talks to their followers about things like karma or other religious concepts like sowing and reaping, in other words, what comes around goes around and everything happens for a reason, their experience of things like, quote, destiny, end quote, and other popular ways of thinking can be something entirely different from what an underdog person might experience. When leaders and other highly visible people constantly rewarded for their good works or their apparent good works, it feels like some kind of cosmic, magical thing that they assume everyone experiences. But in reality, people who are treated as if they're invisible do good works and probably get different results. A course about failure. There are studies and books about underprivileged, marginalized, ignored, and various forms of outcasts from society that are written from academic and clinical perspectives, which, from my perspective, cause more problems than solve because they simply are written by alpha dog people. That is why this course is right for you. I have not only studied success gurus for over 3 decades, I also know what it's like to briefly taste success at times, and at the same time, for most of my life, having failed basically at everything. The irony is that it has been confirmed, in addition to some efforts and products that would consider fairly worthless, I have evidence of contributions to society that have impressed our beloved alphas throughout my lifetime. Although it is not easy to put a price on creative output, overall, it has been noted for decades that much of my work deserves to get a significant amount of exposure and compensated to others who have been successful in similar creative careers. In addition to my artistic output, my career background has encompassed everything from being an educator to a consultant, including work with technology, media, and more. Although my resume is full of giant holes, there are some things that I've accomplished that are still hard to believe considering the lack of recognition and attention I have been offered later in life. Starting as early as about 5 years old, I have done some very unusual things and had the same kinds of things you would see children on television or on stage. However, instead of being recognized, I was treated like I was some type of novelty, forgotten and ignored, while other young people were given an early chance at a career. In addition to this, I've had a lifetime of watching other people get away with getting too much attention, recognition, compensation, and visibility for doing little to nothing to really contribute to society. After living into my 50s and slowly becoming more lucid when it comes to these matters, I began to work harder at finding solutions to this dirty little secret that our society has enabled. In fact, it is such a secret that just bringing it up, the very subject, why do those people, get all that attention or, things like that? It seems to be more taboo than bringing up religion or politics at the family Thanksgiving dinner. I imagine for special occasions like this, where friends and families would gather at the dinner table, like this bizarre tradition we call Thanksgiving. Where I live here in the United States, instead of avoiding controversial subjects, we would actually begin to embrace them. So, the runt of the household asks everyone at the table, why the strongest personalities get to decide nearly all the choices that influence those who are not heard, and if it would be funny if the head of the household would respond with compassion and open-minded understanding. If there is a proverbial elephant in the room, it's probably something like this. In a world of leaders and followers, do all of our leaders really deserve all of that power, influence, visibility, and privilege? If so, are they really contributing enough to society to be bestowed of all that authority? Do they demonstrate enough character and compassion to be in charge of so many well-deserving individuals? In addition, when it comes to creative careers, are they really giving us products that are unique, inspired, original, and relevant? I'm not only concerned about leadership when it comes to managers, politicians, workers in law enforcement, or armed forces, and other authority figures. Because of my background, what concerns me personally are those who are highly recognized in creative careers and education. That's why I focus a lot on musicians, visual artists, social media influencers, as well as other popular media and film and television. In a lot of ways, those folks not only happen to be the people who benefit from a lot of their positions, these are also the kind of leaders that are not necessarily elected and thus may exhibit less responsibility. In addition, highly valuable educators, entrepreneurs, religious leaders, and artists can often so influence the world more than localized political figure could accomplish without literally having the, quote, authority, unquote, over those under their influence. The whole idea of the human underdog is something that I hear to be more of a laughing matter by most people. Alpha types need to deny and block out anything that challenges their power so that we can rarely count on them to seriously acknowledge these concepts. As a result, this causes another problem, and perhaps, can I say, a greater issue because of the number of enablers who are under the influence of the leaders to not challenge our alphas. After all, they bite, they sparkle and shine. We admire them, unknowingly enable them to remain in power. But there are those of us who have not been given up fighting for equality and fairness when it comes to visibility and recognition as a result of our contribution to society. Especially when we do the math, so to speak, in the context of how much power an influencer is getting compared to how much contribution they currently exhibit. Although a laughing matter for some, and for some just about everyone else, apathy. There are those of us who find this constant imbalance in our civilization can cause some of us to continually agonize over what we personally suffer, in addition to suffering an unfair life of being placed at the bottom of society. Those of us who dare to stand up for ourselves multiply what we are already tormented with. This can lead to insanity and forms of self-harm, and for a lot of us, especially men, significantly harming ourselves. For me, I survived. I decided to take a different course of action. When motivational speakers did not have the answer, faith and spirituality did not have the answers, I discovered the one thing that had saved the world countless times: the scientific method. It is staggering the kinds of insight I have benefited from when it comes to the types of discipline I have saturated myself with, in addition to obviously studying history and various social sciences. I was surprised that most significant revelatory material I encountered had to do with paleoanthropology, neuroscience, and zoology. I also got more into quantum physics and reluctantly some branches of pseudoscience related to metaphysics and other efforts to think outside the box. Living in what feels like an unending episode of The Twilight Zone has prompted me to question reality itself. There was even a time during this journey when I entertained the idea that I might be the only real person on Earth and that everything around me was just some kind of projection or fabrication. One way to describe that feeling would be a bit like the Jim Carrey film on the Truman Show. Other fictional examples would be things like The Matrix or stories by Philip K. Dick. When it comes to these kinds of subjects related to underrated versus overrated people, why does it appear as if everyone around me behaves like sleepwalkers, robots, children, and animals?